Three's the Charm by MissCHSparkles, Chapter 22. Before I start, guys, I've just watched the trailer for the new show. Oh my god, does it look amazing? Sirius lay on a clean bed with crisp sheets and at least two plumped up pillows. His hair had been cut and washed, as had the rest of him. The various sores and abrasions that had previously covered him had been tended to, and were now healed completely. A small but highly nutritious meal was digesting within his stomach, which ached with being properly full for the first time in 10 years. But despite the comfort of his surroundings, his mind felt frozen, as though he couldn't take in where he was. It was just that, after so long being in the Dementor's presence, struggling to keep his sanity while being constantly plagued with guilt, to be abruptly placed in a new, considerably better environment was almost enough to finally break his sanity. Right now, all that kept him going was the thought that the rat was finally being brought to justice, and that he had a chance to see Harry again. Harry, his precious godson, one he had failed once before, but he wouldn't fail him again, even though it had been so long, and Harry had obviously grown up since he had last saw him. Sirius was sure he had recognised Harry instantly. He had looked just like James, with that same cheeky smile and easygoing attitude, but with a hint of Lily in his eyes. Of course, he'd only been at school for a few months, but Sirius would bet that Harry had already made an impact. Just wait until next year. He'd be on the Quidditch team for certain. Maybe as a chaser, like James? How many friends did he have? Hopefully none like that miserable rat who had always been a burden on them. They'd only allowed him to hang around because they had felt sorry for him. He had contributed nothing apart from the fact that he was a bloody rat. Sirius's fists clenched as his anger at the situation. Sirius's fists clenched at his anger at the rat, who was allowed to blossom unchecked by the Dementor's hunger. If he had only been allowed 5 minutes alone with the traitor. That's all he needed to make sure that bastard never hurt another living soul. Sirius wasn't sure what he'd do. He just would allow anger to take reign and dispense some justice. Maybe he could transform into a dog and simply ravage the piece of vermin to bloody little shreds. The rage was just starting to take hold when the door finally opened, and his fury evaporated as Sirius shook himself. He still wasn't used to visitors, so this was enough to snap him out of the red haze that had been previously descending upon him. But before he could even think about composing himself properly, his visitor had already entered the room. Professor? Sirius croaked, his throat practically seizing up. As he reached for a glass of water, Dumbledore said, "Sirius, how are you?" Sirius shrugged in response. He knew that this was way better than Azkaban by a very long way. But after his rage had abated, he only felt numb. He wasn't really in a condition to smile and act like he was doing well. "All right, I suppose," he said softly after taking a drink. Dumbledore nodded understandingly as he said, "I imagine this has all been rather sudden." "You've got that right," Sirius snorted, placing his glass back down on the bedside table with a clunk. "1 minute I'm in my cell. The next I'm here. I still can't believe they actually caught him. It is truly incredible." Dumbledore agreed. "No one was more surprised than I when he was brought before me. He was under all our noses for a whole decade." As Sirius nodded, Dumbledore hesitated before saying quietly, "I owe you a great apology, Sirius. I should have spoken to you, found out your side of the story." Sirius just waved his hand. He wasn't angry that no one had ever bothered to wonder if the rat had been the traitor. After all, he was so weak, cowardly, talentless. Hang on, why would anyone suspect him? Hell, he'd find baby Harry a better candidate for being a traitor than that useless bastard. Well, maybe that was stretching it a bit, but the point remained the same. Who could possibly suspect little innocent Peter Pettigrew when they had Sirius Black, a much more talented wizard who had been close to the Potters and whose family had been blacker than black? "It's all right, Professor," he sighed. "I know more than anyone how it looked.
Who would have suspected him? I certainly didn't. When I made James change secret keepers.
Sirius's voice caught in his throat as he remembered the moment when he doomed his best friends. Dumbledore allowed him a moment to compose himself. Once he had, Sirius said falteringly,
I actually thought that Remus was the traitor. He seemed different from how he'd been in school. It wasn't so easy for all of us to be with him when he transformed.
Sirius suddenly stopped, shooting Dumbledore a slightly guilty look. But the old man just smiled.
I am aware of why you became an Animagi. Please continue. Oh, well, yeah. We used to go into the willow as animals to be with him, Sirius explained. It kept him calm. He didn't want to hurt himself, just play with us. It made things so much easier than when he became human again. He wasn't so badly torn up. He didn't have nightmares. He was our friend. It was the least we could do for him.
Sirius trailed off, as he once again wondered what it would be like if Remus hadn't been a werewolf. There would have been no reason to become Animagi, and Peter would never have had the perfect disguise to hide away all these years. Damn, fate sure had a way of laughing at him.
It was a noble thing to do,
Dumbledore commented, and Sirius scoffed.
Tuh! Noble?
I don't know about that, he said darkly, thinking of how they'd released Moony from his prison to run wild through the Hogwarts grounds, of how they had complained of boredom between full moons, conveniently forgetting how agonizing Remus still found the transformations.
But it doesn't matter. I was still stupid enough to think that Remus would betray us. He was always a good friend.
Sirius trailed off, thinking of all the things Remus had done for them. Helping that rat with his homework, trying to keep his other two friends out of trouble, and so many other things.
I don't suppose Remus is still about, is he?
Sirius asked abruptly.
I thought you would want to see him,
Dumbledore said with a knowing smile.
I've just sent an owl. I am waiting for a response. Oh.
Sirius blinked, looking away, his throat aching slightly.
Thank you, sir.
Dumbledore inclined his head, hoping that Remus responding swiftly and positively. Changing the subject, he said,
The trial is being arranged. It should happen within the next week. The minister wishes to have this over with as quickly as possible.
As Sirius scoffed, Dumbledore added,
And after it is over, you will be able to resume your life. I don't know what I'm going to do,
Sirius murmured.
I never imagined being set free. So I haven't. I understand, Dumbledore said gently. I don't know what your eventual vocation might be. But until then, I have found you a place to stay with a family who will take care of you. You have?
He said in surprise, before saying nervously,
It's not one of my family, is it? You are related, but somewhat distantly, Dumbledore said with a smile. Arthur and Molly Weasley have offered to take you in after the trial. Their youngest son, Ron, is friends with Harry. Friends with Harry?
Sirius exclaimed excitedly.
Really? That's incredible! It is, rather, Dumbledore said conversationally, as the previously grim man's face lit up with delight. I imagine you could all spend Christmas together at the Weasley home.
Christmas with Harry. He had never dared to dream that could ever be possible ever again. If only he could see his godson. Just see him. It would make everything so much better. And Christmas wasn't even that far away. He'd heard one of the healers mention that Halloween had only just passed, meaning he'd just have to wait over a month before he'd be reunited with his precious godson.
I'd like that. I'd like that a lot, he said with a dreamy smile. So, does Harry know about me? He does, but he's only just found out about you. He knows you are his godfather and was best friends with James, but not much else currently. I am afraid until after the trial is concluded, you will not be able to contact him.
Sirius slumped in disappointment, but Dumbledore wasn't finished.
That doesn't mean you couldn't work on a letter to send once your name has been cleared. and he will be able to do the same. There is much for you to catch up on." That sounds good," Sirius said with a nod. As much as he'd love to contact Harry now, he knew anything he wrote would just be an incoherent ramble that would probably freak out his godson. Goodness knows he'd probably freak out if he was forced to read what he had written. Dumbledore smiled as he drew out some parchments. Parchment, quills, ink from his robes, and set them down carefully on a bedside table.
"There's no need to rush," he said jovially. "Just take your time. You could always ask for more paper if you run out."
"Thank you,"
Sirius said gratefully.
"I'll come up with something good."
"Of course," Dumbledore said with a smile, as the door opened and a healer came in.
"Looks like visiting time is over,"
Dumbledore commented upon greeting the young healer, who was carrying a tray of food and a couple of potions.
"The Aurors will be interviewing you later, but you have nothing to worry about."
"Not Alistair, is it?" Sirius questioned, making Dumbledore chuckle.
Not many people refer to him as that anymore,"
he said, making Sirius frown.
"You'll know what I mean when you see him,"
was all Dumbledore would say, causing Sirius to smile. He liked a mystery. So old Alistair had some kind of nickname, did he? And it was related to the way he looked. The Old Lion, maybe? Nah, too obvious. Of course, it had been 10 years since he'd seen the old Auror. Loads of things could have changed. "I look forward to seeing him," Sirius said wryly. It would not be a dull meeting. That was a given.
"I think you will enjoy it,"
Dumbledore chuckled before saying reassuringly,
"I will stand a witness for you, since I was very closely involved with the Potters and their fight against Voldemort."
As the healer flinched, Dumbledore added,
Not to mention, I was one of the first to see Peter after his discovery." "Thank you,"
Sirius said gratefully. If there was one thing that couldn't have changed in 10 years, it was Dumbledore's authority. Sirius could rest easy for the first time in 10 years. As he lay back with the healer checking his vitals, he wondered what Harry was doing. He'd be having breakfast right about now. Peter Pettigrew discovered alive! An incredible series of events. Peter Pettigrew, famous for tracking down the notorious mass murderer Sirius Black and dying a hero, has been discovered alive and well. This reporter has learned that he has been living in disguise for over 10 years, a disguise so perfect that it was only revealed by chance. Many supporters of you-know-who were not caught after the war, fled to other countries, but not Peter Pettigrew. It would appear that he remained in this country so he could listen out for news of his former master. Or perhaps he was simply so confident in his deception that he saw no need to flee to safer pastures. There is no doubt he was completely sure that his old school friend, Black, would never see the light of day again."
"Black as he's painted?"
"As many of our readers will know, Sirius Black, the heir to the Black name and fortune, was convicted 10 years ago of not only betraying the Potters to he who must not be named, but of murdering 12 Muggles and his friend and fellow wizard, Peter Pettigrew. In school, Sirius Black was known as a rebel, being the first Black to be sorted into Gryffindor for centuries. All the other Blacks, including his younger brother Regulus, deceased, were sorted into Slytherin. He befriended James Potter, whose son Harry is now the very last male Potter, to the disgust of his family due to the Potters' very pro-light stance. Continued on page 3. The whole hall was buzzing as the news spread from those who had subscribed to the Daily Prophet about the fact that a famous Death Eater and mass murderer had been framed. The upper years could dimly remember the end of the war, and they were the most vocal about it, unable to believe that a dangerous Death Eater had been on the loose, while an innocent man apparently rotted in jail. For younger years they had a lot of questions, especially those who were Muggle-raised. They all wanted to know what Death Eaters were, how the wizarding legal system works. Were there any other Death Eaters that were on the loose? And were they in danger? Of course, those that were wizard-raised could only answer the simplest queries, like what a Death Eater was, and not the more complicated and possibly far-reaching questions. Harry glanced over to the staff table and saw that it was just as animated as the house tables. Professor Flitwick was gesturing furiously with his paper that almost knocking off Professor Sprout's hat. Professors Snape and McGonagall were discussing things quietly, but no less intensively than everyone else in the Great Hall. "Rita didn't write this," Hermione commented as Harry turned back to his breakfast. "I wonder if she is on holiday." "Who cares?" Ron scoffed, placing bacon and sausage and buttered bread before lifting it up with satisfaction. "Long as she doesn't bother us," he added before taking a huge bite. Honestly, that breakfast sounds good. Hermione made a tiny tutting noise at Ron's large mouthful before turning to Harry. Gently, she asked, "Will you be all right, Harry? You know people are going to be asking questions about this." "I've had worse," Harry said with a slight smile. "I don't care about people staring and asking me questions. All that matters is Sirius." She nodded in understanding. It was remarkable how well Harry had dealt with the stares and whispers. He had never encouraged it, and for the most part, hated it. If it was related to Quidditch, he was the least bothered. It tended to be when people tried to spook him, but always ended up making him laugh just because they were so bad. But this time, Harry didn't care. His godfather was out of Azkaban, and soon his innocence will be proven. "I hope he can stay with the Weasleys," Hermione said quietly so the others eating at the table couldn't overhear them. "You'd be able to spend Christmas with each other, but not have to worry about him." "I think Dumbledore will convince them," Harry said with quiet confidence. "I'm not worried about that. I just hope Sirius will be able to get his life back on track." "As long as you're safe and doing well, he will," Hermione assured him. "The first time around, you were his world. It was all about you. When you were safe, he was safe. As long as we keep a lid on things, he'll be fine. He'll be able to go wherever he wants. He won't be forced to hide in his mother's house or anything." Harry nodded as a thought occurred to her. "I do hope he'll give Creature a chance," she said quietly. "We know all he needs is a bit of attention and kindness." "I'll think of something," Harry promised. "I don't want him getting hurt again. Don't worry about it." "She always worries when it comes to house elves," Ron cut in wisely as she rolled her eyes. "Someone needs to," she said, calmly defending, as he grinned at her. "Yeah, nothing's better than SPEW. Yeah, nothing's better than SPEW, he teased, and she shoved him, making him laugh. Harry shook his head. It was much nicer listening to a play fight than ignoring a real fight. Maybe he was being overly optimistic, but things were looking pretty good right now. And perhaps it would last. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. I love it. Sirius is slowly getting together, Dumbledore's building him back up with positive news, and Harry and the others are just like, yeah, let's keep hoping. And the trailer, oh my god, the trailer, it looks so freaking good! Now, my dad and I had a discussion about this at the dinner table, and he told me he's not as excited for the series as he was for the movies. I was raised on Harry Potter. We listened to the audiobooks every year to this day when we go to and from our holidays. And every single year we watch the movies in a marathon. It is literally part of my childhood since the age of 2. So I explained to my dad that not only am I looking forward to the bits in the book that weren't in the movies, because the show has a longer format, but also many people in my generation have had kids, and now I'll be able to watch those kids fall in love with the same series I did. And frankly, it's such a whimsical series to begin with that the world needs that right now. So I'm very much looking forward to this, even though I stand firmly against everything J.K. Rowling says politically. I cannot agree with her on any of those features. I'm simply grateful for the fiction she put into the world and what it has made since. I hope I'm clear on that. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.